Hey guys, Al here, Vitalize Seed. For those of you that follow along, you know that we preach often carbon to nitrogen ratios. And we have two mixes that are focused on one mix feeding the next. So the spring feeds the fall and the fall feeds the spring. We call that nitro boost and carbon load, which is a play on carbon and nitrogen. The nitro boost is a spring planting that's lower in the carbon to nitrogen averaged ratio, and the fall planting is a higher, hence carbon load, carbon to nitrogen ratio. So what does that mean? What does it mean if we're composting, or if we have a garden, or if we're a row crop farmer? What does it mean to understand carbon to nitrogen ratios? Well, it's very important, specifically when picking your cover crops, relative to your next planting. So let's use row crop farming, for example, because I think most people can understand that, or at least visualize it. If we're putting rye grain down, rye is going to fall on this side of the chart in the brown, where it shows higher carbon to nitrogen plantings. So rye, wheat can be as high as 80 to 1 parts carbon to nitrogen. So what that means is it's going to take longer to break down. So if we go and put down 200 or 100 or 150 or 200 pounds of rye per acre, and then try to plant corn into it, we're going to have to supplement that corn with additional nitrogen. So rye grain is known as a really good, robust root structure, good soil builder, all of these great things. But it's also going to tie up a lot of nutrients because it's going to take time for that to break down. Likewise, if we were to plant soybeans in there, we'd be able to get away with, soybeans don't need a ton of nitrogen other than a little bit to get started. And then, of course, they're legumes, so they're going to fix their own nitrogen. And it's a lower carbon to nitrogen plant versus corn is a higher carbon to nitrogen plant. So if you're doing high carbon on top of high carbon on top of high carbon, what ends up happening is you get nutrient tie-up, you get a thatch that isn't going to be able to be broken down without a couple things happening. One, people go back to tillage. Two, people have to use a bunch of nitrogen in order to help break down that carbon. So those are some things. That's why balance is so important. Very similarly with a compost pile. That's actually what this is talking about. So faster compost, reduced risk of nitrogen loss. So they're talking about that balance of taking so many parts carbon, so many parts nitrogen, and making sure that you get an adequate mix so you actually can break it down. If you ever have tried to do compost and you're just putting too many leaves in there, you just have a leaf pile. As you add lower carbon nitrogen plants, grass clippings, food scraps, etc., that pile starts to be diversified in bacteria, and it starts to break down those carbon faster. So think of carbon as sugar, nitrogen as protein. As those microbes get all sugared up, they're eating that carbon, they need that protein source to balance everything out. Hope that was helpful, guys.